Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates spent their teenage years worrying about makeup and boys, she was doing push-ups at 5 in the morning and studying military strategy books she borrowed from the local library. Her father, a retired Marine, had raised her to be tough after her mother died in a car accident when Sarah was only 8 years old. Strength isn't just about muscles, her father would tell her during their weekend training sessions in their backyard. It's about never giving up, no matter how hard things get. Sarah took those words to heart. She excelled in school, became the captain of her high school wrestling team, and graduated with honors. But her real dream was something that seemed impossible for a girl from a small town in Texas. She wanted to become a Navy SEAL. The path wasn't easy. First, she had to join the Navy, then work her way up through the ranks. She spent 4 years as a regular sailor, proving herself over and over again. Her commanding officers noticed her dedication, her physical strength, and, most importantly, her mental toughness. When the Navy finally opened SEAL training to women, Sarah was one of the first to apply. SEAL training was the hardest thing she had ever done. The instructors tried to break her spirit every single day. They made her carry boats over her head, swim in freezing cold water, and stay awake for days at a time. Many of the men in her class quit, but Sarah never gave up. She remembered her father's words and pushed through every challenge. After 18 months of brutal training, Sarah became one of the first female Navy SEALs in history. She was assigned to SEAL Team 6, the most elite unit in the entire military. Her teammates were initially skeptical about having a woman on their team, but Sarah quickly proved herself in combat situations around the world. For 3 years, Sarah served with distinction. She completed dozens of dangerous missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other hostile territories. She saved the lives of her teammates multiple times and earned several medals for bravery. Her commanding officer, Captain James Morrison, often said she was one of the best SEALs he had ever worked with. But Sarah's military career came to an unexpected end during a mission in Syria. Her team was tasked with rescuing American hostages held by a terrorist group. The mission seemed straightforward, but intelligence reports were wrong about the number of enemies they would face. Sarah and her team found themselves outnumbered and outgunned. During the fierce firefight that followed, Sarah took a bullet in her left leg while covering her teammates' retreat. The injury was severe enough that she couldn't continue active duty as a SEAL. After months of physical therapy, doctors told her she would walk normally again, but she couldn't pass the physical requirements needed for special operations. The Navy offered her a desk job, but Sarah couldn't imagine herself pushing papers after years of action. She decided to leave the military and return to civilian life. The transition was harder than she expected. She had spent so many years in the structured world of the military that normal life felt strange and unfamiliar. Sarah moved to Chicago, hoping a big city would offer more opportunities. She rented a small apartment and started looking for work. With her military background and leadership experience, she thought finding a job would be easy. She was wrong. Many employers seemed impressed by her resume during phone interviews, but their attitudes changed when they met her in person. Some were uncomfortable with the idea of hiring a former SEAL. Others seemed to think she wouldn't fit in with their corporate culture. After months of rejections, Sarah was running out of money and starting to feel desperate. That's when she met Marcus Chun at a coffee shop near her apartment. Marcus was a successful businessman who owned a security consulting company. He overheard Sarah talking on the phone with another potential employer who was clearly not interested in hiring her. After she hung up, Marcus approached her table. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Are you looking for work in security?" Sarah looked up at the well-dressed Asian man standing beside her table. He appeared to be in his 40s, with kind eyes and a genuine smile. "Yes, I am," she replied cautiously. Marcus introduced himself and explained that his company, Chun Security Solutions, provided protection services for wealthy clients and corporations. He said he was always looking for qualified professionals, especially those with military backgrounds. "Your experience as a Navy SEAL would be incredibly valuable to my clients," Marcus said. "Would you be interested in discussing a position with my company?" For the first time in months, Sarah felt hopeful. She agreed to meet with Marcus at his office the following week. The interview went better than she could have imagined. Marcus seemed genuinely impressed by her military record and combat experience. He offered her a job as a senior security consultant with an excellent salary and benefits package. Sarah's new job involved protecting high-profile clients during public events, traveling with them to dangerous locations, and conducting security assessments for their homes and businesses. She was good at the work and enjoyed the challenge of keeping people safe. Her first major assignment was protecting Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a wealthy pharmaceutical executive who had received death threats from animal rights activists. Dr. Rodriguez was attending a medical conference in Miami, and Sarah was responsible for her safety during the 3-day event. The assignment went smoothly, and Dr. Rodriguez was so impressed with Sarah's professionalism that she requested Sarah for all future security needs. This led to more high-profile clients and bigger assignments for Sarah. Within 6 months, Sarah had become one of the most requested consultants at Chin Security Solutions. She was making more money than she ever had in the military and was finally feeling like she had found her place in civilian life. But her success caught the attention of some of her colleagues who weren't happy about the new girl getting all the best assignments. 3 of them, in particular, seemed to resent Sarah's rapid rise in the company. Jake Williams was a former Army Ranger who had been with the company for 5 years. He was used to being Marcus's go-to person for important assignments and didn't like being overshadowed by the new recruit. Jake was tall and muscular, with a shaved head and numerous tattoos covering his arms. He had a reputation for being tough and reliable, but also arrogant and difficult to work with. Tom Bradley was another longtime employee who felt threatened by Sarah's presence. He had been a police officer for 15 years before joining Chin Security Solutions and considered himself an expert in personal protection. Tom was in his early 40s, overweight, and bitter about never advancing as far as he thought he deserved in his previous career. The third member of the group was Rick Patterson, a former Marine who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Rick was the youngest of the 3, only 30 years old, but he was also the most ambitious. He had been hoping to be promoted to team leader and saw Sarah as an obstacle to his career goals. These 3 men began working together to undermine Sarah's reputation within the company. They started small, spreading rumors about her being difficult to work with and questioning whether a woman could really handle the physical demands of their job. They made jokes about her military service, suggesting that standards had been lowered to allow women into SEAL training. At first, Sarah tried to ignore their behavior. She had dealt with similar attitudes during her military career and knew that proving herself through her work was the best response. She continued to excel at her assignments and maintained her professional demeanor even when the 3 men made snide comments or tried to exclude her from team meetings. But Jake, Tom, and Rick weren't content with just workplace harassment. They wanted Sarah gone, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to make that happen. They began documenting every minor mistake she made and reporting them to Marcus as major security breaches. They falsified reports about her performance and claimed that clients had complained about her conduct. Marcus was initially skeptical of these reports because they contradicted his own observations and the positive feedback he had received directly from clients. However, as the complaints continued to pile up, he began to have doubts about Sarah's abilities. The 3 men also began sabotaging Sarah's assignments directly. During one protection detail for a famous movie star, Rick deliberately gave Sarah incorrect information about the client's schedule, causing her to be in the wrong location when a group of aggressive paparazzi surrounded the star's car. The incident made Sarah look incompetent and unprofessional. Another time, Jake tampered with Sarah's earpiece during a security sweep of a client's mansion, causing her to miss important radio communications from other team members. The confusion nearly resulted in a security breach when Sarah failed to respond to reports of a suspicious person on the property. These incidents were carefully orchestrated to look like genuine mistakes on Sarah's part. The 3 men were experienced enough to cover their tracks and make their sabotage appear accidental. They knew exactly how to manipulate situations to make Sarah look bad while maintaining their own reputations. Sarah began to notice that things weren't adding up. She was too experienced and well-trained to make the kinds of mistakes that were being attributed to her. She started to suspect that someone was deliberately trying to sabotage her career, but she couldn't prove it. The situation came to a head during what should have been a routine assignment protecting a tech billionaire during a business trip to Los Angeles. Sarah was part of a four-person team that included Jake, Tom, and Rick. The client, Robert Sterling, was attending a series of meetings with potential investors and needed protection due to recent threats from disgruntled former employees. Everything seemed normal during the first day of the assignment. The team successfully escorted Sterling to his meetings and back to his hotel without any incidents. But that night, while Sarah was monitoring the hotel's security cameras from the lobby, Jake approached her with what appeared to be urgent information. "Sarah, we just got word that there's been a credible threat against Sterling," Jake said, showing her his phone. "Marcus wants you to move him to a secure location immediately." Sarah looked at the message on Jake's phone, which appeared to be from their boss. The text instructed her to take Sterling to a safe house across town while the rest of the team investigated the threat. This seemed unusual, as protocol would normally require the entire team to move together, but the message appeared authentic. "Where are Tom and Rick?" Sarah asked. "They're already conducting a sweep of the hotel to make sure it's secure," Jake replied. "Marcus wants you to move fast before anyone else finds out about the threat." Something felt wrong about the situation, but Sarah couldn't identify exactly what was bothering her. The message seemed legitimate, and time was supposedly critical. She decided to follow orders and immediately went to Sterling's room to inform him of the situation. Sterling was understandably concerned about the threat, but agreed to move to the safe house. Sarah quickly gathered his belongings and escorted him to the parking garage where a company car was waiting. Jake had provided her with the address of the safe house and assured her that additional security would meet them there. As Sarah drove through the dark Los Angeles streets, she tried calling Marcus to confirm the situation, but his phone went straight to voicemail. This was unusual, as Marcus always kept his phone on during active assignments. Sarah also tried calling Tom and Rick, but neither of them answered. A growing sense of unease settled in Sarah's stomach as she realized she couldn't reach any of her colleagues. She pulled over to the side of the road and called the company's emergency line, but the call wouldn't go through. Her phone seemed to be blocked from accessing the company's network. That's when she noticed the car that had been following them since they left the hotel. It was a black sedan with tinted windows, and it had made every turn they had made. Sarah's SEAL training kicked in as she realized they were being followed, possibly into a trap. "Mr. Sterling," she said calmly, not wanting to panic her client. "We need to change our destination. I think someone might be following us." Sterling looked back and saw the black sedan. "What's happening? Is this related to the threat you mentioned?" Sarah was beginning to suspect that there was no real threat, and that she had been deliberately fed false information. She made a sudden turn into a well-lit shopping center and parked near the entrance to a busy restaurant. The black sedan drove past without stopping, confirming her suspicions that they were being followed. "Mr. Sterling, I need you to call your assistant and verify that you received any threat messages today," Sarah instructed. "I'm starting to think this might be a setup." Sterling made the call and quickly confirmed that his office had received no threat reports. He was confused and angry about being unnecessarily moved from his hotel. Sarah realized that she had been manipulated into a potentially dangerous situation. She immediately called 911 and reported the suspicious vehicle and the false threat information. The police arrived within minutes and took statements from both Sarah and Sterling. They also contacted the FBI, who were already investigating threats against Sterling and took the situation very seriously. While they waited for federal agents to arrive, Sarah tried calling Marcus again. This time he answered, and he was clearly confused about the situation. "Sarah, what's going on?" "I just got a call from the police saying you reported a kidnapping attempt." "Marcus, didn't you send Jake a message telling me to move Sterling to a safe house?" Sarah asked. "No, I never sent any such message." "Where are Jake, Tom, and Rick?" "They're supposed to be with you." Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the extent of the deception. Her three colleagues had orchestrated an elaborate plan to make her look like she had kidnapped their client. If she hadn't noticed the tail car and realized something was wrong, She could have driven straight into a trap that would have ended her career and possibly landed her in prison. The FBI agents arrived and immediately took control of the situation. They interviewed Sarah and Sterling separately and confirmed that no legitimate threat had been made against the client. They also discovered that the message Jake had shown Sarah was fake and had been created using spoofing software. A search for Jake, Tom, and Rick revealed that all three men had left. The weeks following the incident felt like the darkest period of Sarah's life since her mother's death. She sat in her small Chicago apartment, staring at news articles about herself on her laptop screen. The headlines were brutal and inaccurate, painting her as a rogue security agent who had attempted to kidnap a billionaire. Even though the FBI had cleared her of all charges and the truth had been reported, the initial false story had spread much faster than the correction. Sarah's savings were dwindling rapidly. Without a steady income, she couldn't afford her rent for much longer. She had applied to dozens of security companies across the country, but none were willing to hire her. Her military decorations and exemplary service record couldn't overcome the negative publicity surrounding the Sterling incident. The isolation was perhaps worse than the financial stress. Sarah had always been a social person who thrived on teamwork and camaraderie, first in the military and then in her security work. Now she spent days alone in her apartment, with only her thoughts and the crushing weight of injustice for company. One particularly difficult morning, as Sarah was drinking coffee and reading another rejection email from a potential employer, her phone rang. The caller ID showed her father's number. She had been avoiding his calls for weeks, not wanting to burden him with her problems or admit how completely her life had fallen apart. "Hi, Dad," she answered, trying to sound more upbeat than she felt. "Sarah, honey, I've been watching the news. Are you okay? Why haven't you been returning my calls?" Her father's concerned voice broke through the emotional wall she had built around herself. For the first time since the incident, Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. "I'm fine, Dad," she lied. "Just dealing with some work stuff." "Sarah Martinez, I raised you better than to lie to your old man. I know you're hurting, and I know this whole situation isn't your fault. Tell me what's really going on." The dam finally broke, and Sarah found herself telling her father everything. She explained about Jake, Tom, and Rick's betrayal, the elaborate setup, and how her career had been destroyed by their lies. She talked about the rejection letters, the dwindling bank account, and the feeling that her life was spiraling out of control. Her father listened without interrupting, letting her pour out months of frustration and pain. When she finally finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Sarah, do you remember what I taught you about fighting back when you were young? Never start a fight, but always finish one," Sarah replied, reciting the lesson he had drilled into her as a child. "That's right. And what did I tell you about people who hurt your family?" Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks as she remembered another of her father's favorite sayings. "That karma is real, but sometimes it needs a little help finding its way." "Those three men made a big mistake when they decided to mess with my daughter," her father continued. "They think they've won, but they don't know who they're dealing with. You're a Martinez, and we don't give up when someone tries to destroy us. We get even." Her father's words reignited something in Sarah that had been dormant since the incident. She was a Navy SEAL, trained to overcome impossible odds and complete missions that others couldn't even imagine. She had survived the most brutal military training in the world and served her country with honor. Three jealous cowards weren't going to be the end of her story. "What do you think I should do, Dad? First, you need to stop feeling sorry for yourself and start thinking like the warrior I raised. Second, you need to find those three pieces of garbage and make sure they pay for what they did. And third, you need to rebuild your life in a way that shows everyone who the real Sarah Martinez is." After the call ended, Sarah felt energized for the first time in months. She opened her laptop and began researching Jake Williams, Tom Bradley, and Rick Patterson. If they thought they could disappear and live happily ever after while her life was in ruins, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Finding information about the three men wasn't difficult for someone with Sarah's investigative skills and military contacts. Jake Williams had fled to Phoenix, Arizona, where he was working for a small security company under his real name. He apparently felt confident that he had covered his tracks well enough to avoid consequences for his actions. Tom Bradley had moved to Denver, Colorado, where he had started his own private investigation business. He was advertising his services online and seemed to be doing well financially. The irony of a man who had framed an innocent person now working as an investigator wasn't lost on Sarah. Rick Patterson had been the smartest of the three, moving to Seattle and changing his name to Rick Palmer. He was working as a security consultant for tech companies and had even gotten married to a local woman he met online. He seemed to be living a completely new life, as if the Chicago incident had never happened. Sarah spent the next several weeks developing detailed profiles of all three men. She learned their daily routines, their work schedules, their favorite restaurants, and their social media habits. She discovered their weaknesses, their fears, and, most importantly, their secrets. Jake Williams had a serious gambling problem that had gotten him into debt with some dangerous people. He was borrowing money from loan sharks to fund his addiction and was already struggling to make payments. Tom Bradley was having an affair with a married client, and his own wife had no idea about his infidelity. Rick Patterson's new identity wasn't as solid as he thought, and his new wife had no idea about his past or the real reason he had moved to Seattle. Armed with this information, Sarah began planning her revenge. But this wouldn't be a simple matter of exposing their secrets or getting them fired from their jobs. These men had tried to destroy her life completely, and she was going to return the favor in a way that was both devastating and perfectly legal. Sarah's first target was Jake Williams in Phoenix. She used her remaining savings to fly to Arizona and rent a car under a false name. She had learned the art of creating temporary identities during her SEAL training, and those skills served her well now. Jake was working for Desert Security Solutions, a small company that provided guards for shopping centers and office buildings. He was living in a modest apartment complex and spending most of his free time at a casino called Lucky Strike, where he played poker and blackjack almost every night. Sarah spent several days observing Jake's routine. He was clearly in financial trouble, driving an old car with several dents, and wearing the same clothes multiple days in a row. His gambling addiction had gotten worse since leaving Chicago, and he was making increasingly desperate bets to try to win back the money he owed. On a Thursday evening, Sarah followed Jake to Lucky Strike and watched him lose nearly $1,000 at the poker table. She could see the panic in his eyes as his chip stack dwindled to nothing. When he finally left the casino at 2 in the morning, he looked like a broken man. That's when Sarah made her move. She approached Jake in the parking lot, stepping out of the shadows like a ghost from his past. "Hello, Jake," she said calmly. Jake spun around, and his face went white when he recognized her. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "I came to thank you," she replied, her voice steady and controlled. "Thank me? For what?" "For teaching me a valuable lesson about trust. You see, Jake, I used to believe that people in our line of work had honor and integrity. You showed me how naive I was." Jake looked around nervously, clearly hoping that other people would come out of the casino, but the parking lot was empty except for the two of them. "Look, Sarah, I know you're probably angry about what happened in Chicago, but that wasn't personal. It was just business." Sarah laughed, a cold sound that made Jake take a step backward. "Business? You tried to frame me for kidnapping, Jake. You destroyed my career and my reputation. You made it impossible for me to work in the only field I know. And you call that business? We never meant for it to go that far," Jake said weakly. "We just wanted you to get transferred to a different department. No, you wanted me gone completely, and you didn't care what happened to me as long as you got what you wanted. But here's the thing, Jake, you made one very big mistake." "What mistake?" "You assumed I would just disappear quietly and let you win. But I'm a Navy SEAL, and we never forget. We never forgive. And we always complete our missions." Jake was sweating now, despite the cool desert night. "What do you want, Sarah? Money? I don't have much, but I can try to pay you something." "I don't want your money, Jake. I want something much more valuable than that." Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him a series of photographs she had taken. They showed Jake meeting with known criminals who ran illegal gambling operations in Phoenix. She had been following him for days and had documented several meetings that would be very interesting to both his employer and local law enforcement. You've been selling information about your security clients to help these guys plan robberies, Sarah said. The police would be very interested to know that the guard who's supposed to protect the West Side Shopping Center has been helping criminals case the place. Jake's eyes widened as he realized the implications. That's not what was happening. I just owed them money, and they wanted to know about the security schedules. That's exactly what was happening, Jake. You've been committing crimes to pay off your gambling debts. The FBI takes that kind of thing very seriously, especially when it involves someone who was already investigated for conspiracy in the Sterling case. You can't prove anything, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can. I have photos, audio recordings, and testimony from one of your gambling buddies who's already been arrested on unrelated charges. He's very eager to make a deal with prosecutors, and your name came up during his questioning. This was a lie, but Jake was too panicked to think clearly. Sarah had learned during her military interrogation training that scared people often confessed to things they hadn't even been accused of. What do you want from me? Jake asked desperately. I want you to call a press conference and tell the truth about what happened in Chicago. I want you to admit that you, Tom, and Rick framed me and explain exactly how you did it. I want you to clear my name publicly and take full responsibility for your actions. Jake was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. If he confessed to framing Sarah, he would likely face criminal charges and would definitely lose his job. But if Sarah exposed his illegal activities in Phoenix, he would face much more serious consequences. If I do what you're asking, will you destroy the evidence you have against me here? I'll consider it, Sarah replied. But first, you need to prove that you're serious about making things right. She handed him a business card with the contact information for a prominent journalist in Chicago who had been following the Sterling case. You have 24 hours to call this reporter and arrange an interview. If you don't, I'll be making some calls of my own to people who would be very interested in your extracurricular activities. Sarah turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back at Jake one more time. Oh, and Jake, if you try to run or warn Tom and Rick about what's coming, I'll find you. I've been trained to track people in some of the most hostile territories in the world. Phoenix is going to feel like a vacation compared to what I'll put you through. With that, Sarah disappeared into the darkness, leaving Jake alone in the parking lot with the weight of his crimes and the certainty that his past had finally caught up with him. The next morning, Sarah flew to Denver to begin the second phase of her plan. Tom Bradley was about to learn that his affair with a married client was the least of his problems. Tom had been more careful about covering his tracks than Jake, but he had made one crucial mistake. He had been using his real social security number for his new business, which made him easy to track through public records. Sarah found his office in a small strip mall on the outskirts of Denver and began surveillance. Bradley Investigations was a one-man operation that specialized in insurance fraud and cheating spouse cases. Tom worked long hours and seemed to be doing well financially, driving a new pickup truck and living in a nice suburban home with his wife and 2 teenage children. Sarah followed Tom for 3 days, learning his routine and identifying his vulnerabilities. She discovered that he was indeed having an affair with Rebecca Martinez, a married woman who had hired him to investigate her husband's business dealings. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Sarah. Tom was being paid to investigate a potentially cheating husband while simultaneously having an affair with his client. But Tom's affair wasn't the secret that would bring him down. Sarah had dug deeper into his background and discovered something much more damaging. During his time as a police officer in Chicago, Tom had been suspected of planting evidence on suspects, but internal affairs had never been able to prove it. He had left the force just before a major investigation into police corruption was announced. Sarah had contacts in the Chicago Police Department from her security work, and she was able to obtain copies of the old internal affairs files on Tom. The evidence wasn't conclusive enough for criminal charges, but it was definitely enough to destroy his reputation and his private investigation business. On a Friday afternoon, Sarah walked into Tom's office, pretending to be a potential client. Tom was alone, working at his desk, and looked up when she entered. "Can I help you?" he asked, not immediately recognizing her. "Hello, Tom. It's been a while." Tom's face went through a series of expressions as recognition dawned. First confusion, then surprise, and finally, fear. Sarah, what are you doing in Denver? I'm here to offer you a business opportunity, she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. I don't know what game you're playing, but I want you out of my office right now. This isn't a game, Tom. This is about justice. You see, I've been doing some investigating of my own, and I've learned some very interesting things about your time with the Chicago PD. She placed a manila folder on his desk and slid it toward him. Tom opened it reluctantly and found copies of internal affairs reports, witness statements, and photographs that he thought had been buried forever. Where did you get these? He whispered. Does it matter? What matters is what I do with them. You planted drugs on at least 6 innocent people during your time as a cop, Tom. You destroyed their lives to make yourself look like a hero detective. You can't prove that. Internal Affairs investigated and found nothing. Maybe not then, but times have changed. DNA evidence, digital forensics, and new witness testimony have a way of bringing old secrets to light. I've been in contact with some of those people you framed, and they're very interested in reopening their cases. Tom's hands were shaking as he flipped through the documents. He knew that if this information became public, his private investigation license would be revoked, his marriage would be destroyed, and he could face criminal charges. What do you want? He asked quietly. The same thing I wanted from Jake Williams in Phoenix. I want you to tell the truth about what you did to me in Chicago. Jake already talked to you? Jake is currently explaining to a reporter how the 3 of you conspired to frame me for kidnapping. You have a choice, Tom. You can cooperate and hope for leniency, or you can try to fight this and face the consequences of both your actions in Chicago and your police corruption. Tom buried his face in his hands. If I admit to framing you, I'll lose everything. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy my life. The difference between us, Tom, is that I earned everything I had through hard work and sacrifice. You tried to build your career by tearing other people down. Sarah stood up to leave. You have until Sunday night to call the same reporter Jake is talking to. If you don't, Monday morning I start making calls to the Colorado State Investigation Bureau, the Denver Police Internal Affairs Division, and every one of your current clients. She paused at the door. Oh, and Tom, you might want to have a conversation with your wife about Rebecca Martinez before someone else does. As Sarah left the office, she could hear Tom making frantic phone calls behind her. Phase 2 of her plan was complete. Now it was time to deal with Rick Patterson, who thought changing his name would be enough to escape his past. The flight to Seattle gave Sarah time to reflect on how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been focused on building a new career and finding her place in civilian life. Now she was methodically tracking down the men who had betrayed her and forcing them to face consequences for their actions. Some people might call what she was doing revenge, but Sarah preferred to think of it as justice. These 3 men had committed serious crimes against her and had never faced any punishment. The legal system had failed to hold them accountable, so she was doing what she had been trained to do, completing a mission that others couldn't or wouldn't complete. Rick Patterson, now calling himself Rick Palmer, was the smartest and most dangerous of the 3 conspirators. He had created a new identity, moved across the country, and built what appeared to be a completely new life. But intelligence and caution could only protect him for so long from someone with Sarah's skills and determination. Finding Rick in Seattle wasn't difficult once Sarah knew his new name. He was working for a prestigious security consulting firm called Northwest Protection Services and had been promoted to team leader within just a few months of being hired. He lived in a nice apartment with his new wife, drove an expensive car, and seemed to have successfully reinvented himself. But Rick had made one critical error in creating his new identity. He had kept the same birthday, which made it possible for Sarah to trace his real identity through cross-reference database searches. She had also discovered that his wife, Amanda Palmer, was completely unaware of his true past and believed his story about being a military veteran who had left his previous job due to stress. Sarah spent a week in Seattle, gathering intelligence on Rick's new life and looking for the best way to approach him. She learned that he and Amanda were planning to start a family and had been married for only 6 months. Amanda was a nurse at a local hospital and seemed to be genuinely in love with the man she knew as Rick Palmer. The more Sarah learned about Amanda, the more conflicted she felt about her plan. Amanda was an innocent victim who would be hurt when the truth about her husband came out. But Rick had chosen to build his new life on lies and deception, and Sarah couldn't allow him to escape consequences for his actions just because he had involved an innocent woman. On a rainy Thursday evening, Sarah finally confronted Rick in the parking garage of his apartment building. She had been waiting in the shadows when he arrived home from work, and she stepped out as he was walking toward the elevator. "Hello, Rick," she said quietly. "Or should I say, hello, Rick Palmer?" Rick froze, his keys falling from his hand and clattering on the concrete floor. He turned slowly, and Sarah could see the exact moment when he realized that his carefully constructed new life was about to collapse. "Sarah," he whispered, "how did you find me? Did you really think changing your name would be enough to hide from me? I'm trained to find people who don't want to be found, Rick. A fake ID and a new apartment aren't going to stop me." Rick looked around the empty parking garage, probably hoping someone would appear to interrupt their conversation. "What do you want?" "I want the same thing I got from Jake and Tom. I want you to tell the truth about what you did to me." "Jake and Tom?" Rick's face went pale. "You've been to see them?" "I have. Jake is currently explaining to reporters how the three of you conspired to frame me for kidnapping. Tom is doing the same thing, and also discussing his habit of planting evidence on innocent people when he was a cop. They've both been very cooperative once they understood the consequences of not telling the truth." Rick slumped against his car, looking like a man who had just received a terminal diagnosis. "You've destroyed them." "No, Rick. You destroyed them when you involved them in your plan to destroy me. I just made sure they faced consequences for their actions." "What do you know about my life here?" "I know everything, Rick. I know about Amanda, your job, your new identity, and your plans to start a family. I also know that Amanda has no idea who she really married." "Don't involve Amanda in this," Rick said quickly. "She's done nothing wrong." "You're right, she hasn't. But you involved her when you chose to build your new life on lies. Did you think you could just disappear and live happily ever after while my life was in ruins?" Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Rick a series of documents she had compiled about his false identity. "Creating fake identification documents is a federal crime, Rick. The FBI would be very interested to know that someone who is already under investigation for conspiracy has been living under a false name." "How much do you want?" Rick asked desperately. "I have money saved up. I can pay you to keep quiet about this." "I don't want your money. I want justice. You tried to destroy my life, and you almost succeeded. Now I'm going to give you a choice that your victims never got." Sarah explained the same deal she had offered Jake and Tom. Rick could confess publicly to his role in framing her, or she would expose his false identity and ensure that both his new employer and his wife learned the truth about his past. "If I confess, I'll lose everything here. Amanda will leave me, I'll lose my job, and I'll probably face criminal charges." "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "But you'll still have a chance to start over honestly. If I expose you instead, you'll lose everything anyway. Plus, you'll face federal charges for identity fraud." Rick was quiet for a long time, weighing his options. Finally, he looked up at Sarah with resignation in his eyes. The news broke on a Tuesday morning in Chicago. Sarah was sitting in a coffee shop near her apartment, watching the local news on her phone, when she saw the headline that made her heart race. "Former security employees confess to framing Navy SEAL in fake kidnapping plot." The story was everything Sarah had hoped for and more. Jake Williams, Tom Bradley, and Rick Patterson had all given detailed confessions to investigative reporter Michelle Torres, explaining exactly how they had conspired to frame Sarah for attempting to kidnap Robert Sterling. The three men admitted to creating fake threat messages, sabotaging her equipment, and setting up the elaborate trap that nearly destroyed her career. Even better, the story revealed additional crimes that each man had committed. Jake's involvement with illegal gambling operations in Phoenix, Tom's history of planting evidence during his time as a police officer, and Rick's false identity in Seattle were all exposed in the comprehensive investigation that followed their confessions. Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and relief as she read the article. For the first time in months, her phone began ringing with calls from people who wanted to hear her side of the story. Former clients reached out to apologize for doubting her, and several security companies expressed interest in hiring her. But Sarah's victory was bittersweet. While her name had been cleared and her reputation was being restored, the months of unemployment and stress had taken a toll on her finances and her confidence. She had spent most of her savings tracking down the 3 men who betrayed her, and she was still struggling to pay her bills. More importantly, Sarah had discovered something about herself during her quest for justice that both impressed and concerned her. She had enjoyed the hunt, the careful planning, and the moment of confrontation when her enemies realized they had been caught. The skills she had learned as a Navy SEAL, surveillance, investigation, psychological pressure, had proven to be powerful tools for civilian life, but in ways she had never expected. As offers for interviews and job opportunities poured in, Sarah realized she had reached a crossroads in her life. She could return to traditional security work, using her cleared reputation to rebuild the career that had been taken from her. Or she could pursue a different path entirely, one that would allow her to help other people who had been wronged by those in positions of power. The decision became clear when Sarah received a call from Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the pharmaceutical executive who had been her first major client at Chin Security Solutions. "Sarah, I just saw the news about what those men did to you. I can't believe I fell for their lies and stopped requesting your services. I owe you a huge apology." "Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. That means a lot coming from you. I want to make this right," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "I have a business proposition for you. I've been thinking about starting a consulting firm that specializes in corporate security and investigation services. After seeing how you handled this situation, I think you would be the perfect person to run it." The offer was generous and appealing, but Sarah found herself thinking about something else entirely. During her investigation of Jake, Tom, and Rick, she had discovered numerous other people who had been wronged by corrupt security personnel, dishonest police officers, and unethical private investigators. These victims had little recourse through normal legal channels and couldn't afford to hire expensive attorneys or private investigators to seek justice. "Dr. Rodriguez, I appreciate your offer, but I think I have a different calling now. I want to help people who have been betrayed and can't fight back on their own." "What do you mean?" Sarah explained her idea for starting a specialized investigation service that would help victims of corruption, fraud, and abuse seek justice when the traditional legal system failed them. She would use her military training and the skills she had developed during her own quest for justice to help others who found themselves in similar situations. "That's a noble goal, Sarah. But how would you fund something like that? Most of the people who need that kind of help can't afford to pay for it." "I've been thinking about that too. I want to create a model where successful cases help fund the ones where clients can't pay. Wealthy clients who need investigation services would subsidize cases for people who can't afford help." Dr. Rodriguez was intrigued by the concept. "I like it. It's like a legal aid society for investigation services. Count me in as your first paying client, and I'll help you find other people who would support this kind of work." Within 2 weeks, Sarah had incorporated Martinez Investigations, a private investigation firm with a unique mission to provide justice for people who had been wronged by those in positions of power. Her first office was a small space in downtown Chicago, furnished with used desks and equipment donated by supporters who believed in her vision. Sarah's first case came from an unexpected source. Amanda Palmer, Rick Patterson's wife, contacted her through the company's new website. Amanda had learned the truth about her husband's identity and his role in framing Sarah, and she was struggling with both the betrayal and the practical challenges of having married someone who didn't legally exist. "Mrs. Palmer, I understand this must be incredibly difficult for you," Sarah said during their initial meeting. "I want you to know that I never intended for innocent people to be hurt by this." Amanda was a small, quiet woman in her late 20s with kind eyes that now held a deep sadness. "I know you didn't. I've read everything about the case, and I understand why you had to expose the truth. But now I don't know what to do. I'm married to someone who doesn't exist, and I don't even know if I can get divorced from someone who used a fake name." Sarah had been dreading this conversation, knowing that Amanda was the most innocent victim in the entire situation. But she also recognized an opportunity to test whether her new business model could really help people in impossible situations. "Amanda, I want to help you sort this out, and I won't charge you anything for my services. This is exactly the kind of situation my company was created to handle. Over the next several weeks, Sarah worked with attorneys and federal investigators to help Amanda navigate the complex legal issues created by her husband's false identity. The process revealed that Rick had committed numerous federal crimes in creating his new identity, and he was eventually arrested and charged with identity fraud, conspiracy, and filing false documents. Amanda was granted an annulment rather than a divorce, since her marriage to Rick Palmer was legally invalid. Sarah also helped her recover money that Rick had taken from their joint bank accounts before his arrest, ensuring that Amanda wasn't left financially ruined by her husband's crimes. The case established Sarah's reputation as an investigator who would go to extraordinary lengths to help people who had been wronged. Word of her work spread quickly through legal circles and social media, and soon she was receiving requests for help from people across the country. Sarah's second major case involved a whistleblower named David Chun, no relation to Marcus Chun, who had exposed safety violations at a chemical manufacturing plant in Ohio. After David reported the violations to federal regulators, he was fired from his job and blacklisted from working in his industry. Worse, someone had been spreading false rumors that David was mentally unstable and had fabricated the safety concerns for personal reasons. David contacted Sarah after reading about her work helping Amanda Palmer. He explained that he had lost his career, his reputation, and most of his savings trying to fight the chemical company through legal channels. The company's attorneys were too expensive for him to match, and regulatory agencies were moving too slowly to prevent potential disasters at the plant. Mr. Chun, what kind of safety violations are we talking about? Sarah asked during their initial phone consultation. They're illegally disposing of toxic waste in ways that could contaminate the local water supply. I documented everything, but the company claims my evidence was fabricated. They've made it impossible for me to find work anywhere in the industry. Sarah was immediately interested in the case. Environmental crimes were serious federal offenses, and if David's allegations were true, the company's actions could harm thousands of people in the surrounding community. This was exactly the kind of case where traditional legal approaches might move too slowly to prevent real harm. I'll take your case, Mr. Chun, but I need you to understand that my methods might be unconventional. I don't just gather evidence and file reports. I find ways to apply pressure that makes people want to do the right thing. Sarah flew to Ohio and spent 2 weeks investigating the chemical company, Meridian Industries. She discovered that David's allegations were not only true, but were actually understating the scope of the company's illegal activities. Meridian had been cutting costs by improperly disposing of several types of toxic waste, and they had been bribing local inspectors to overlook violations. But Sarah also discovered that Meridian's executives had made a critical mistake. They had been so focused on hiding their environmental crimes that they hadn't been careful about other aspects of their business. Sarah's investigation revealed that the company was also committing securities fraud by lying to investors about their environmental compliance costs. Sarah compiled a comprehensive report documenting both the environmental violations and the securities fraud, then began reaching out to various federal agencies and media outlets. But instead of simply filing complaints and hoping for action, she used a more strategic approach. She started by contacting Meridian's largest institutional investors, providing them with evidence that the company was engaging in activities that could result in massive fines and legal liability. These investors began pressuring Meridian's board of directors for answers about their environmental practices. Simultaneously, Sarah reached out to investigative journalists who specialized in environmental and corporate crime stories. She provided them with exclusive access to David's documentation, along with additional evidence she had gathered independently. The resulting media coverage created a public relations nightmare for Meridian. Finally, Sarah contacted the Environmental Protection Agency, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, providing each agency with evidence relevant to their specific jurisdictions. But instead of simply mailing reports, she arranged for David to testify directly to investigators and helped him prepare presentations that clearly demonstrated the scope of Meridian's crimes. The coordinated pressure from investors, media, and federal agencies created a perfect storm for Meridian Industries. Within a month of Sarah's investigation, The company agreed to a massive settlement with the EPA that included cleaning up their contaminated sites and implementing new safety protocols. The company also settled a class action lawsuit filed by local residents and agreed to pay David Chen a substantial sum in compensation for wrongful termination. More importantly, the Meridian case established Sarah as a serious player in the world of corporate investigations. Her unique approach of combining military tactics with traditional investigative methods had proven effective against opponents with significant resources and legal protection. Word of Sarah's success spread quickly through both the corporate world and the community of people who fought against corporate wrongdoing. She began receiving requests for help from environmental activists, consumer advocates, and other whistleblowers who had been unable to get justice through traditional channels. One of these requests came from Maria Santos, a former nurse who had been fired for reporting unsafe conditions at a for-profit hospital in Texas. Maria had documented cases where the hospital had endangered patients by understaffing critical care units and using expired medications. When she reported these issues to state regulators, the hospital retaliated by firing her and spreading false information about her professional competence. Ms. Martinez, I've read about your work, and I think you might be able to help me, Maria said during their initial phone call. I try to protect patients, and now I can't find work anywhere. The hospital has made sure that no one in the healthcare industry will hire me. Sarah was immediately sympathetic to Maria's situation. Healthcare fraud and patient safety violations were serious crimes that directly affected vulnerable people. If Maria's allegations were true, the hospital's actions could result in patient deaths. Tell me exactly what you observed at the hospital, Sarah requested. Maria explained that Lone Star Medical Center had been cutting costs by reducing nursing staff below safe levels and reusing expensive medical equipment that was supposed to be disposed of after single use. She had documented multiple cases where patients had suffered complications that could have been prevented with proper staffing and equipment. I reported everything to the state health department, but the hospital claimed I was making false accusations because I was angry about being denied a promotion, Maria continued. Now they've blacklisted me, and I can't even get hired at small clinics. Sarah flew to Texas and began investigating Lone Star Medical Center. She discovered that Maria's allegations were accurate and that the hospital's cost-cutting measures had resulted in several patient deaths that could have been prevented. But she also found that the hospital had been involved in an even more serious scheme. Lone Star Medical Center had been billing Medicare and Medicaid for procedures that were never performed and charging patients for expensive medications while actually giving them cheaper generic alternatives. The hospital's executives had been systematically defrauding both government programs and individual patients while putting lives at risk. Sarah's investigation revealed that the hospital's financial crimes were being used to fund the lavish lifestyles of its executives. The CEO, Dr. Richard Blackwell, had purchased multiple luxury homes and expensive cars with money that should have been used for patient care. Other executives had been taking expensive vacations and investing in personal business ventures using hospital funds. But Sarah's most shocking discovery was that state health inspectors had been aware of many of the problems at Lone Star Medical Center but had been bribed to ignore violations. The corruption extended into the state regulatory system that was supposed to protect patients. Sarah realized that this case required a more comprehensive approach than her previous investigations. The hospital's crimes affected hundreds of patients and involved corruption at multiple levels of government and healthcare administration. Simply exposing the truth wouldn't be enough. She needed to ensure that all the responsible parties faced serious consequences. She began by documenting everything thoroughly, creating detailed reports that could be used by federal prosecutors and civil attorneys. She also worked with Maria to identify other former employees who had witnessed misconduct but had been afraid to speak out due to fear of retaliation. Sarah then reached out to families of patients who had died or been injured due to the hospital's negligence. Many of these families had suspected that their loved ones had received substandard care, but hadn't known how to prove it or seek justice. Sarah helped them understand their legal options and connected them with attorneys who specialized in medical malpractice cases. The investigation took 3 months to complete, but The results were devastating for everyone involved in the conspiracy. The FBI raided Lone Star Medical Center and arrested several executives on charges of healthcare fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. State health inspectors who had taken bribes were also arrested and charged with corruption. Dr. Richard Blackwell and 3 other executives were eventually sentenced to federal prison, and the hospital was forced to pay tens of millions of dollars in fines and restitution to patients and government programs. Maria Santos received a substantial whistleblower reward and was hired by a respected hospital system that valued her integrity and commitment to patient safety. The Lone Star case established Sarah's reputation as an investigator who could take on complex, high-stakes cases involving powerful institutions. She had proven that her unconventional methods could be effective even against opponents with significant resources and political connections. But the case also took a personal toll on Sarah. She had spent months documenting how greed and corruption had led to preventable deaths and suffering. She had interviewed grieving families and seen firsthand how institutional failures could destroy innocent lives. The work was emotionally draining in ways that her military service had never been. Sarah began to question whether she was strong enough to continue taking on cases where the stakes were literally life and death. She had gotten into this work to help people seek justice, but she was learning that justice often came with a heavy emotional cost. The answer came during a conversation with her father, who had been following her work through news reports and phone calls. "Sarah, I'm proud of what you've accomplished," he told her during one of their weekly conversations. "You've built something important, and you're helping people who have nowhere else to turn." "Thanks, Dad, but sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough for this. These cases are so intense, and the stakes are so high. Sometimes I feel like I'm carrying the weight of other people's pain. Do you remember what I taught you about being strong? That strength isn't about never feeling pain. It's about feeling the pain and choosing to keep fighting anyway." "That's right. And what have you been doing with every case you've taken?" Sarah thought about Maria Santos, who was now working at a job she loved and helping to improve patient safety protocols. She thought about David Chun, who had used his whistleblower award to start an environmental consulting firm that helped other companies avoid the mistakes Meridian had made. She thought about Amanda Palmer, who had rebuilt her life and was now engaged to a man who truly loved her. "I've been helping people rebuild their lives and find justice when the system failed them." Exactly. You're not just solving individual cases, Sarah. You're proving that people don't have to accept injustice just because powerful people tell them to. That's a gift that not many people have. Her father's words reminded Sarah why she had started Martinez Investigations in the first place. She wasn't just seeking justice for individual clients. She was proving that ordinary people could fight back against corruption and abuse when they had the right help and support. The conversation with her father reinvigorated Sarah's sense of purpose, but it also made her realize that she needed to expand her operation if she wanted to help more people. She couldn't handle complex cases like Lone Star Medical Center by herself, and she was turning away potential clients because she didn't have enough resources to help everyone who needed assistance. Sarah decided to hire additional investigators and support staff, but she was determined to find people who shared her values and commitment to justice. She needed team members who would be willing to work for lower pay in exchange for the satisfaction of helping people who couldn't help themselves. Her first hire was Marcus Chun, the former owner of Chun Security Solutions, who had given her the opportunity that led to her betrayal by Jake, Tom, and Rick. Marcus had been devastated by the discovery that his most trusted employees had committed crimes while working for his company, and he had shut down his business rather than try to rebuild his reputation. "Marcus, I know you're dealing with guilt about what happened, but those men's crimes weren't your fault," Sarah told him during their meeting. "You gave me a chance when no one else would, and you supported me when the truth came out. I'd like to give you a chance to be part of something positive." Marcus was intrigued by Sarah's vision for Martinez Investigations, especially the commitment to helping people who couldn't afford traditional investigation services. He agreed to join the company as a senior investigator, bringing his experience in corporate security and his extensive network of contacts in the business community. Sarah's second hire was Dr. Rebecca Torres, a forensic accountant who had been following the company's work since the Meridian Industries case. Rebecca specialized in uncovering financial crimes and had previously worked for the FBI before starting her own consulting practice. "I've been looking for an opportunity to work on cases where I could really make a difference," Rebecca explained during her interview. "Most of my clients are corporations trying to protect themselves from lawsuits. I'd rather use my skills to help people who have been victimized by corporate crimes." The first sign of trouble came on a cold February morning when Sarah arrived at her office to find the front door slightly ajar. Her SEAL training immediately kicked in as she noticed the subtle signs that someone had been inside the building during the night. The security system had been disarmed, but there was no record of anyone entering through the normal channels. Sarah signaled for Marcus, Rebecca, and Tony to stay outside while she carefully entered the office alone. What she found inside made her blood run cold. The office had been searched thoroughly, but whoever had done it was professional enough to make it look like a simple burglary. Computers were missing, along with some cash from the office safe. But Sarah noticed that important case files had been photographed rather than stolen. "This wasn't a burglary," she told her team after calling the police to file a report. "Someone wanted information about our cases, and they took the computers and money to make it look like a random crime." Tony, with his police experience, immediately began dusting for fingerprints and checking for other evidence that might reveal who was responsible. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing," he reported after his initial investigation. "They wore gloves, avoided the security cameras, and knew exactly where to look for sensitive information." The break-in was clearly connected to Martinez investigation's recent success in exposing powerful criminals and corrupt organizations. Sarah had made enemies of people with significant resources and connections, and someone had decided it was time to fight back. Over the next few weeks, the attacks on Sarah and her team escalated. Rebecca's car was vandalized in the parking garage of her apartment building. Marcus received threatening phone calls in the middle of the night. Tony discovered that someone had been asking questions about his family members and his previous address. But the most serious incident occurred when Sarah was leaving the office late one evening. As she walked to her car in the dimly lit parking lot, two men in dark clothing approached her from different directions. Their movements were coordinated and purposeful, clearly indicating that this was a planned attack rather than a random mugging. Sarah's military training took over instantly. She assessed the situation, identified escape routes, and prepared to defend herself. The men were large and appeared to be professional fighters, but they had made the mistake of underestimating their target. "Sarah Martinez?" one of the men asked as they closed in on her position. "Depends who's asking," she replied, shifting her weight and positioning herself for combat. "We have a message from some people who aren't happy with your recent work," the second man said, pulling out a metal pipe from inside his jacket. Sarah didn't wait for them to elaborate on their message. She launched herself at the nearest attacker, using techniques she had learned during her SEAL training to quickly disable him. The second man swung his pipe at her head, but Sarah ducked under the attack and swept his legs, sending him crashing to the ground. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. Both attackers were unconscious when Sarah finished with them, and she immediately called 911 to report the incident. When the police arrived, they found the two men carrying false identification and cell phones that contained no useful information about who had hired them. "Ms. Martinez, this appears to be a professional hit," Detective Linda Hayes told her during the investigation. "These men are known associates of organized crime figures, and they don't come cheap. Someone with serious money wanted to send you a message." The attack on Sarah was a clear escalation in the conflict between Martinez investigations and the powerful enemies they had made. Someone was no longer content with simply trying to gather information about their operations. They wanted to intimidate or eliminate Sarah entirely. Sarah called an emergency meeting with her team to discuss the situation. "It's clear that we've made some very dangerous enemies," she told Marcus, Rebecca, and Tony. "I want everyone to know that if you decide this is too risky, I'll understand if you want to leave." "I'm not going anywhere," Tony said immediately. "I've been fighting corruption my entire career, and I'm not going to let some criminals scare me away now." "Same here," Rebecca added. "If anything, this proves that we're having a real impact." People don't hire professional thugs unless they're seriously worried about what we might discover. Marcus nodded in agreement. We all knew this work would be dangerous when we started. But helping people like Maria Santos and David Chun is worth the risk. Sarah felt grateful for her team's loyalty, but she also realized that they needed to take serious security precautions to protect themselves and their clients. She arranged for enhanced security systems in the office, began varying her daily routines to avoid predictable patterns, and started carrying the concealed handgun she was licensed to use. Despite the increased security measures, Sarah knew that their enemies wouldn't give up easily. The attack in the parking lot had been a warning, but if Martinez's investigations continued to threaten powerful criminals and corrupt officials, the next attempt might be aimed at eliminating them permanently. The identity of their primary enemy became clear when Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Richard Blackwell, the former CEO of Lone Star Medical Center, who was currently serving a federal prison sentence for healthcare fraud. Ms. Martinez, I think we need to have a conversation, Blackwell said when Sarah answered her phone. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Dr. Blackwell. You're in prison because you committed serious crimes that hurt innocent people. Actually, I think you'll be very interested in what I have to say. You see, I've recently learned some information about who's been targeting you and your little investigation company. Sarah was skeptical, but she was also curious about what Blackwell might know. She agreed to visit him at the federal prison where he was serving his sentence, bringing Tony along for security and as a witness to their conversation. Blackwell looked older and thinner than he had in the news photos from his trial. Prison life had clearly taken a toll on the man who had once lived a luxurious lifestyle funded by healthcare fraud. But his eyes still held the calculating intelligence that had made him successful in his criminal enterprises. Ms. Martinez, I want to start by saying that I don't blame you personally for my current situation. You were just doing your job, and I was the one who chose to commit crimes. But there are other people who see things differently. What do you mean? Sarah asked. The people whose operations you've exposed have lost hundreds of millions of dollars because of your investigations. More importantly, you've proven that they're not as untouchable as they thought they were. That makes you a serious threat to their entire business model. Blackwell explained that Sarah's success had attracted the attention of a powerful criminal organization that specialized in corrupting legitimate businesses and government agencies. This organization, led by a man known only as the broker, made money by facilitating illegal activities for wealthy clients who wanted to avoid the risks of directly committing crimes themselves. The broker's clients include corporate executives, politicians, and other people who have too much to lose by getting caught committing crimes directly, Blackwell continued. Instead, they pay the broker's organization to handle the dirty work while maintaining plausible deniability. According to Blackwell, the broker's organization had been involved in many of the cases that Martinez's investigations had exposed. They had been the ones who helped Meridian Industries cover up their environmental crimes, facilitated the corruption at Lone Star Medical Center, and provided support for various other illegal activities that Sarah had uncovered. The broker is furious about the damage you've done to his business, Blackwell said. He's lost several major clients, and federal agencies are starting to connect the dots between different cases. You've made him visible in ways that are very bad for his operation. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked. What do you get out of warning me about the broker? Blackwell smiled grimly. Because the broker's organization was responsible for some of the crimes I was convicted of, but they disappeared when I got arrested and left me to take the fall alone. I want them to face justice for their role in what happened at the hospital. The former CEO provided Sarah with detailed information about the broker's organization, including names, locations, and evidence of their involvement in various criminal enterprises. He also warned her that the broker was planning a major operation to destroy Martinez's investigations and eliminate anyone who might pose a threat to his business. He's not just going to send more thugs to beat you up, Blackwell warned. He's planning to frame you for serious crimes and destroy your credibility completely. By the time he's done, no one will believe anything you say about corruption or criminal activity. Sarah left the prison with a mixture of valuable intelligence and deep concern about what she was facing. The broker's organization was clearly more sophisticated and dangerous than any enemy she had confronted before. They had resources, connections, and a proven track record of success in protecting criminals and corrupt officials. But Sarah also realized that she now had an opportunity to take down the criminal organization that had been facilitating corruption and illegal activity across multiple industries and government agencies. If she could expose the broker's operations, she could potentially prevent countless future crimes and help bring justice to victims who didn't even know they had been wronged. Sarah shared Blackwell's information with her team and began planning their most ambitious investigation yet. They would need to be extremely careful, as the broker's organization was already aware of their activities and was planning to strike first. The investigation required months of careful surveillance and evidence gathering. Sarah and her team had to document the broker's activities without revealing their own investigation, while also protecting themselves from the criminal organization's attempts to frame or eliminate them. The breakthrough came when Rebecca discovered financial records that revealed how the broker's organization laundered money for their criminal clients. The organization operated a network of legitimate businesses that were used to clean illegal profits and provide cover for their operatives. "Look at this," Rebecca told the team during one of their secure meetings. "The broker's organization operates dozens of companies across different industries. They use these businesses to hire their operatives, purchase equipment, and move money without attracting attention from law enforcement." The financial records also revealed the identities of many of the broker's clients, including several prominent politicians, corporate executives, and government officials who had been paying for illegal services. The scope of the corruption was staggering, involving people at the highest levels of business and government. Sarah realized that exposing the broker's organization would require a coordinated effort involving multiple federal agencies and international law enforcement organizations. The criminal network operated across state and national boundaries, making it difficult for any single agency to investigate comprehensively. She began reaching out to federal investigators who had worked on cases connected to the broker's organization, sharing information and helping them understand the connections between seemingly unrelated crimes. The FBI, DEA, IRS, and other agencies began coordinating their investigations under the supervision of a joint task force. But the broker was not sitting idle while Sarah and her team gathered evidence against his organization. He had been planning his own operation to destroy Martinez's investigations, and he was ready to put his plan into action. The attack came on a Thursday morning when Sarah arrived at the office to find federal agents waiting with search warrants. The agents informed her that Martinez's investigations was under investigation for extortion, blackmail, and conspiracy to commit fraud. "Ms. Martinez, we have evidence that your company has been demanding payments from former clients in exchange for not revealing embarrassing information about their personal lives," Special Agent Janet Morrison explained as agents searched the office. Sarah was stunned by the accusations, which were completely false and contradicted everything she and her team stood for. "Agent Morrison, these charges are ridiculous. We've never demanded money from anyone, and we certainly haven't engaged in blackmail. We have recordings of phone conversations where you and your associates discussed demanding payments from various clients. We also have bank records showing suspicious deposits into accounts controlled by your company." Sarah immediately realized that the broker's organization had implemented the frame-up that Dr. Blackwell had warned her about. They had somehow created fake evidence that made it appear as if Martinez's investigations was engaging in extortion and blackmail activities. The fake evidence was sophisticated and convincing. The recordings sound the third member of Sarah's team was Tony Rodriguez, a former police detective who had been forced to retire early after exposing corruption in his own department. Tony had been investigating police officers who were taking bribes from drug dealers when he discovered that the corruption extended to high-ranking officials in the department. His efforts to expose the truth had made him a target within his own organization, and he had eventually been forced to leave for his own safety. "I know what it's like to be betrayed by people you thought you could trust," Tony told Sarah. "I also know how hard it is to get justice when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones committing crimes." With her expanded team in place, Sarah was able to take on more complex cases and help a wider range of clients. Martinez's investigations quickly developed a reputation as the place to go when traditional legal channels failed and when powerful people thought they were above the law. But Sarah's growing success had also attracted the attention of some very dangerous enemies. The people and organizations she had exposed were not happy about the consequences they had faced, and some of them were beginning to plan their revenge against the woman who had cost them millions of dollars and years of freedom. Sarah was about to learn that seeking justice for others sometimes meant putting herself in serious danger, and that her enemies were willing to go to extreme lengths to stop her from exposing their crimes. If I do this, will you leave Amanda out of it? She doesn't deserve to be hurt because of my mistakes. That depends on how honest you are about everything else. The more truthful you are, the more I'll consider protecting innocent people who got caught up in your lies. Rick nodded slowly. I'll do it. I'll call the reporter and tell the truth about Chicago. Good. But Rick, if you try to run or disappear again, I'll find you. And next time, I won't be interested in deals or confessions. Next time, I'll destroy everything you care about without giving you a choice. As Sarah walked away, she could hear Rick making the phone call that would end his carefully constructed new life. The three men who had betrayed her were finally going to face justice. But Sarah's mission wasn't complete yet. She still needed to rebuild her own life and prove that she was stronger than the people who had tried to destroy her. Hotel shortly after Sarah departed with Sterling. Their phones were turned off, and they weren't responding to calls from Marcus or the FBI. It appeared that they had fled after setting their trap. The truth about what happened that night would eventually come out, but the damage to Sarah's life and career was already done. The incident made national news, with headlines suggesting that a former Navy SEAL had attempted to kidnap a billionaire tech executive. Even though Sarah was quickly cleared of any wrongdoing, her reputation was severely damaged. Marcus was devastated to learn that three of his most trusted employees had betrayed not only Sarah but the entire company. He immediately fired all three men and implemented new security protocols to prevent similar incidents in the future. He also publicly supported Sarah and praised her quick thinking in recognizing the trap. But the damage was done. Other security companies were reluctant to hire someone who had been involved in such a high-profile incident, regardless of the fact that she was the victim rather than the perpetrator. Clients who had previously requested Sarah specifically now refused to work with her, afraid that her presence might attract unwanted media attention. Within weeks, Sarah found herself unemployed again, with her reputation in ruins and her future uncertain. The three men who had betrayed her had disappeared, apparently believing they had successfully destroyed her career. They had no idea that they had just made a terrible mistake by crossing someone who had been trained by the United States Navy to never give up and never forget.